Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Yesterday, May 2nd, 2019, was the last day of U.S.-Iran oil sanctions waivers, especially to the 8 countries that were still relying on Iranian oil for their energy needs. Now that those waivers have been lifted, we have to wait and see what happens next. How will the Iranian economy move forward? What will those countries depending on Iranian oil do now, especially the likes of China, Turkey, and others? To discuss that a bit further, we're joined now by Daniel Khazeni-Rad, who is the editor of, is an economic and business researcher, I should say, pardon me, who looks at multiple sectors of Iran's economy from within the country as well as from the external perspective. We're also joined by Aslani, who is a political analyst, and he is joining us from the Iranian capital. Daniel and Abbas, thank you both for joining us. Daniel, what do you make of the lifting of these sanctions waivers, specifically, of course, for the sale of oil? Will the U.S. succeed in its goals to zero out Iranian oil exports?
Well, as you can imagine, the entire oil market and the gas market at the moment is suffering from the shock of the removal of Iranian oil. Over the next few months, we'll see how it plays out. Nobody really knows because nobody's ever pulled an entire country off the market in one fell swoop. Countries like Turkey, India, and China, Pakistan as well, they have all stated their own positions, but over the next few weeks or days, even for that matter, it's going to be interesting to see how people react to the US pressure. The US have called it maximum pressure, but you could call it maximum fallout because nobody knows which way it's going to go at the moment. On top of that, you have the pressure from the Saudis and the Emiratis who are looking to expand their portfolio and make up the loss and, you know, earn greater revenues from their oil and gas exports as time goes on.
Okay, so Abbas, tell us from within the country, is the mood like there right now? Obviously, Iranians under a lot of economic pressure, and if this goes through as planned by the U.S., that makes the economy even worse, doesn't it?
Well, here in Tehran, the Iranian officials believe that the zeroing Iran's oil export will not happen because they believe that they can export Iranian oil from different channels like the unofficial ones or through working with the smaller companies who do not have linkage to the United States or they do not have much at stake.
But Abbas, if I may come in, Abbas, but that means that Iran would have to sell its oil for cheaper, right? Because many people, especially those buyers, would know that Iran is under pressure. So Iran is still making a loss, isn't it?
This might decrease the number of barrels Iran might be exporting, but on the other hand, it will have some political or other kind of consequences and repercussions which might add to the oil price in the global energy market. And in a way, Iran might be able to compensate that. But in the light of this action, I think the political tensions between Iran and the United States will increase. And that's why we are seeing that the rhetoric heating up inside Iran. Now we are hearing from officials that Iran's patience in vis-a-vis the nuclear deal is running out, and as Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister said, enough is enough. This indicates that what we might be seeing some likely or possible reaction from Iranian side in relation to the nuclear deal, as well as some developments in the region, including the Strait of Hormuz. This is something which can have influences not just in the region, but globally in the energy market. And there are lots of developments to happen. And this makes Iran to be less dependent on the oil export. And as we have been hearing from the leaders saying that Iran's economy needs to be less dependent on the oil.
And that's a good point, Abbas, because diversification of the economy is something that Ayatollah Khamenei has spoken about a lot over these years. Daniel, I want to get your thoughts on that. I know we've discussed diversification of the Iranian economy in an earlier conversation as well. Daniel, do you think that that has happened to an extent where Iran can walk away from its dependence on oil?
It can walk away from its dependence on oil. However, there's the added problems you have now of the US now going after petrochemical and gas exports. So whatever Iran will export, the US is now obviously going to target it and try to cut off any form of income Iran has internationally. They did that already in May last year with the sanctions placed on Iranian automotive industries. So that forced the pullout of companies like Peugeot and Renault from the market. Recently, there was a conversation that Tata might work with Iran, but nothing again. Lada also announced it was pulling out of any negotiations with Saipem, Iran's second biggest car maker. So ultimately, everything is fair game for the Americans at the moment.
So do you think, Daniel, that the Iranian government, I'm talking specifically with the Rouhani administration, did they plan well enough for such a day?
I don't think anybody could predict the severity of the situation beforehand. Nobody could predict a Trump win. Nobody could predict that he would take on the likes of John Bolton. The entire situation has turned 180 in a matter of 12 months. So, again, it's going to change again in the future. The Americans are obviously, have a game plan in movement at the moment, and they are going to push their own agenda.
Okay. Okay, so Abbas, what is that agenda on the part of the Americans? Because I imagine, Abbas, within the country, and this has been criticism that's been growing, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, within the country, that the Rouhani administration did not have a plan B. Their entire seemingly policy was just this nuclear deal, and now it's essentially fallen apart, and they're sort of scrambling for options, aren't they?
Whether to respond to the question that whether Iran has a plan B or not, we might be need to be waiting a bit more days to see how Iran and to what extent Iran will react. In the longer run, in the economic section, Iran might be moving towards, for example, if it is decreasing the dependence on the oil, it can also invest on the oil-related products like petrochemicals. However, it is expected that the United States will sanction the petrochemicals as well. But when comparing the petrochemicals to the crude oil export, it will be much harder to impose the sanctions against those petrochemicals. But I think Iran will try to shift from the west to east in order to focus on cooperation with the traditional allies in the region and also beyond the region, like China, Russia, and Turkey, or even India. And part of that will depend upon those other countries to see how much they can work with Iran. But I think Iran will shift tactics in relation likely to the nuclear deal, or even the tensions with the United States might increase in the region, and that is issue even the officials in Trump administration are concerned about. And I think Iran will find its own ways to go around the sanctions, as it has been the case in the past as well. And because this is not something new to Iran, and Iran has lived with this, that's why it is to some extent likely that Iran will be able to survive this.
Daniel, but this is really testing, I imagine, the Iranian, right? And you're an economic expert. You've spent a significant amount of time in Iran, as have I, and we know about the fluctuation of the value just of the currency and the problems that creates in just normal citizens' lives. Will the Iranian people hold on at this time quietly, or will there be protests? Will there be unrest?
I mean, when you look at the situation and you see how Iran has responded, or the Iranian citizenry have responded to the situation in 2013, 2014, when the previous round of sanctions were on, there were, mutterings of discontent amongst people, but the focus of the angst and anger were directly targeted at the US, because they're the ones doing it. Prior to the imposition of sanctions by the US, international companies were willing to trade. So it's not Iran's. The problem is how the Rouhani administration responds to the problems and the situation that they've got on their hands at the moment. And that's going to tell whether people go out onto the streets or not. Ultimately, with regards to Iran and the wider region, Turkey has been one of the stalwarts in responding to US pressure. They've obviously got their own situation with the US at the moment. Russia again, and with regards to the Eurasian Economic Union, we're seeing more interactions between Iran and countries in Central Asia. Take, for example, meat imports and stuff like that. So they're relying more heavily on regional imports. And obviously Pakistan, and with Imran Khan, who came the other week to Tehran and impressed his hosts, I think there's going to be growth in eastward trade too.
Will that be enough, though, Abbas, for the Iranian? I mean, do you think? Because, I imagine there are quite a few concerns. Does Iran have enough financial reserves, for example? Right now, we have two different exchange rates. We have the 4,200 exchange rate, Tuman, which is the official rate, which is only used for very, very specific transactions. Then we have the other rate on the black market, which has fluctuated all the way to 19,000 Tumans and is now, I believe, back around 14,000 odd hundreds. This is a very dire situation, isn't it, economically, Abbas?
Well, the Iranian government is trying to adapt to the situation, as there have been some plans in relation to the issue. Recently, we have been seeing that the discussions on the removing some parts of the subsidy for the gasoline in the country, that's been the case. Also, as the Central Bank of Iran's governor said that they want to somehow to invest on the non-oil export in order to make some preparations in order to not to let those currencies to go out of the country and to bring currency to the country, vice versa. So there have been lots of discussions, and they are trying to adapt to the situation. And it is expected that we might be seeing some new decisions by the government, as well as trying to bypass the sanctions and different options on the table economically. And much details might not come out of the government or the officials, because while that is the issue of bypassing the sanctions, they will not reveal their plan, because it can make it useless and the others can diffuse it.
Okay, so, Daniel, there has been that concern about, as I put to Abbas, the two exchange rates. Many economists saying that that should not be the case. There should only be one exchange rate, which should be the real exchange rate, really, because that is creating issues in and of itself. What do you make of the fiscal policies that Iran has currently been practicing? How do those need to be changed?
The Central Bank of Iran, under its new leadership of Abdel Nasser Hemati, has brought in several drastic changes to his predecessor, Bali al-Saif, in regards to the forex markets, like you mentioned. He repeatedly now says that he has it under his control, and the central bank is keeping an eye on how much forex is moving into the market. That can be witnessed. There has been less fluctuations, or the fluctuations have been smaller, you would say. On a wider scale, the central bank is looking to develop blockchain technologies and the growth of digital banking technologies, which hopefully would overhaul its antiquated system now, which is unable to deal with the broader complications of sanctions. So there is light at the end of the tunnel in terms of financial resources. However, it all matters on whether Iran is able to get foreign currency in from abroad and continue to stock up its forex reserves.
And do you think, Daniel, that Iran will be able to get that foreign currency, or enough of such foreign currency?
I mean, with the help of being aligned with Russia now and Turkey, there probably is more chance of them being able to accrue further funds from abroad. Yeah.
Okay, so Abbas, I imagine that at some level there is a concern, isn't there, Abbas, to be that dependent on others, even in the East, for Iran's economy? Do you think that's being spoken about enough as well? That I imagine, obviously, the Russians and others would want things cheaper from Iran because they already know that Iran is in a desperate situation. Is that a safe place for Iran to be standing right now?
Well, for sure, the situation can be a bit difficult, and the options might not be as wide as it could be if the situation was different.
Yeah.
But these are the options that Iran has available, and the cooperation with China, Russia, Turkey, or countries of this kind are not something new. Iran is not just starting to work with them, and this is started from the past, and Iran has cooperated with them. But in the relation with why Iran is just working with the traditional and the Eastern allies, and that's because the Western ones have not been able to pave the way for the cooperation with Iran.
Yeah.
In relation with the nuclear deal, Iran has tried to keep to its commitments, but this deal seems to be just one way, and Iran just fulfilling its commitments, but the other side not keeping to its commitments, of which is the economic commitments. Iran did nuclear commitments, but the other side was supposed and expected to deliver on some economic
So Abbas, then the natural question then, Abbas, is why is Iran still in this deal? Why isn't it walking away?
So that's the question that I think the officials are studying, and they are considering that question. And I think a new decision on this issue is not, we cannot rule out any new decision on this issue in Tehran. And I think we might be waiting a bit more to see what will come out in this regard.
And Daniel, I know again that I've asked you this earlier. Do you think the situation now has changed enough that Iran should walk away from the deal?
Well, it depends on whether the Europeans can continue to, whether the Europeans can help with their INSTEX, which is their financial gateway to trade with Iran for non-sanctions.
But that's a very limited move, isn't it, Daniel? I mean, with the details of that you and I spoke about earlier, and that's very limited, isn't it?
It is limited. There are other transactions and gateways opening up across. There's one for Turkey. Pakistan is trying to do one. India will try to do one. Russia will try to do one. So, these are limited, but Iran has limited options right now. Whether it wants to leave the JCPOA, I still don't think that's probably the wisest of decisions, because the US is waiting for them on the other side of that gate.
Very well. We'll leave there as our final word, gentlemen. But of course, we appreciate time, insight, and analysis. That was Daniel Khazeni-Rad speaking to us from the UK. He is an economic and business researcher looking at multiple sectors of Iran's economy. And we were also joined by Mr. Abbas Aslani, who is a political analyst and journalist himself. He was speaking to us from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Viewers, as Daniel and Abbas both spoke about towards the end there, the JCPOA's future really is hanging in the balance right now, the Iran nuclear deal, that is. With these oil sanction waivers being lifted, will countries that have traditionally stood by Iran continue to stand by Iran? Some of them may want their oil cheaper. Is the Iranian economy diverse enough to walk away from its oil exports dependence? We'll have to wait and see. Our guests thought so that it is, independent enough, but I don't know about that. We'll have to wait and see if the economy really can walk away from oil dependence, especially considering it's been dependent on oil for so many years. And then obviously, does this mean that this is a march towards war with Iran, which is something that many people have spoken about, that after the month of Ramadan, the Islamic month of Ramadan, that there may very well be a war that will be waged against Iran. We'll wait and see how all of that develops within the country and in the region and beyond. I'll be back, though, with our next segment after a short break. Thanks for staying with us, viewers, here in Scope. Well, in this segment, we're going to discuss Sudan and the crisis ongoing there since the ouster of Omar al-Bashir. The Military Council and civilians have not yet agreed upon the makeup of any transitional interim government or leadership of that country. Civilians, obviously, and the grassroots movements want more power in their hands. The military is having a hard time giving that up. And then the African Union keeps extending, seemingly, its deadlines. Initially, it gave a 15-day deadline to the Military Council, Transitional Council, that is, to give power to a civilian government of some sort. And now that has been extended to 60 days. Well, to discuss that situation a bit further, I'm joined by Dr.Bola Adediran, who holds a PhD in politics from the University of Manchester in the UK. He is currently in Bristol at the University of West England. Bola, thanks for joining us here in Scope. What do you make of the situation in Sudan right now? It seems that the AU doesn't have as much power as one would imagine it does.
it is a very disappointing situation in Sudan at the moment. Very, very disappointing. Particularly because there is a lot of expectations that people have of the African Union, and it seems that the African Union has let down the people of Sudan. What it has done in the first place is that traditionally it's always responded to coups and coup d'etats within 48 hours. So remember Mauritania in 2015, Burkina Faso in 2015. Those incidences were responded to quickly. Those states were suspended within 48 hours mostly. And so it was surprising in the first place that Sudan was given quite a longer time to transit into. Is
that Bola, if I may come in, is that a sign of how important that is for the AU?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just I think it's reflective of what has become of the African Union in recent years. And I will go back to 2011 when the Libyan crisis happened in 2011. If you remember clearly that the African Union was sidelined in Libya in 2011. It wanted a diplomatic solution. It wanted to provide some covering for Gaddafi. And the South African president went on a diplomatic mission to Libya. He was almost bumped out of Libya by NATO forces because the Arab League and NATO decided to take an action that was contrary to what the African Union wanted to do. And we saw that not only in 2011, but we saw that in Gambia in 2016 when the African Union literally relinquished authority to ECOWAS, deferred to ECOWAS on the Gambian crisis. We saw that again in Zimbabwe in 2017, where it first described what was going on in Zimbabwe as a coup and condemned it, then backtracked almost immediately and accepted what was effectively a coup. What I'm saying basically is that it seems that the African Union is beginning to develop this cold feet, and what is happening in Sudan is also a reflection of that new attitude that African Union is beginning to have.
Indeed, because the involvement of El Sisi, Egypt. I mean, he doesn't exactly have the most credible democratic ambitions, does he? Even in Egypt, and the fact that he held this meeting for Sudan and any democratic transitional process there, that in and of itself is quite alarming, is it not, Bola?
Absolutely. And I think that what is also very disappointing about what is going on in Sudan is the influence of a lot of international powers who do not necessarily mean well for Sudan. So you've rightly mentioned about Egypt. The extension of the 15-day deadline was brokered by Sisi, who is leading the African Union effectively at the moment, and obviously extended to 60 days. But Egypt, I mean, there is a sense in which Egypt has a long-standing interest in Sudan, and it's some sense legitimate. I mean, pre-independence, Egypt and the UK were the sort of colonial forces, the sort of foreign powers operating in Sudan. But we're also seeing that Egypt has an interest to ensure some form of regional stability in Sudan, and Egypt is in an alliance with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and so you have to see that coalition of states and their interest in ensuring that nothing changes as much as possible in Sudan, and that is what is most concerning for me. So
what are they then hoping will happen in these 60 days, Bola? Because the people, seemingly at least in Sudan, are standing strong as well. So it seems like a stalemate, and I don't know if anything drastic will change in 60 days.
Well, it is the only part of this whole saga that has been good to see and has been very interesting for outside analysts like me, is that the people of Sudan have really had enough. They are staying strong. They are standing strong. Yesterday, there was a call for a million man march in the capital city, and it was well attended. And to see that people are absolutely willing to stay the course and to ensure that nothing changes about and the transitional military council does not subvert the will of the people. It is gladdening to see. But I think what will change over the next course of over the next few weeks is how much international partners will really mean well for Sudan. Not the Egypts of this world, not the Saudi Arabias of this world, not the UAEs of this world, who have their own very kind of parochial interest in Sudan. What the other parts of the international community really does in helping the Sudanese people make a transition to democratic governance. And I think that is what is going to be most important in these coming days.
So, Bola, I wanted to talk about the timing of all of this. It's not just Sudan, which is in flux, is it? It's also Algeria and even Libya. So that region, seemingly, in Africa is in flux. And I wanted to ask you why you think that's happening now. Obviously, it can be argued that each of these countries should be taken as individual cases, but it does seem like a pattern where in Libya, it almost seems like we're taking many, many steps backwards, where a lot of the world, even France included, is supporting a strong man instead of even the UN-backed government there. In Algeria, we've had the president step down, but then essentially his allies, his pals are still running the country and running the show, and the same seemingly in Sudan.
Yes. Again, we look at if we want to look at the role of the African Union in Libya, then it would come up short significantly. In Libya, as you've mentioned, the UN backs the transitional government the government in Tripoli. It appears that regional powers are backing General Haftar, who is in the east, and there are a lot of problems with that. And we see that the African Union is also not taking a significant role in Libya. Yeah. But you're very correct that there is a sense in which this is what I have called Arab Spring 2.0 in some sense. The kind of the convolution of actions in Northern Africa is quite interesting. So from Algeria to Libya and to Sudan, and that I think that is also a sense that if you look at those three countries, it seems like it's more like an unfinished business of some sort. Remember when the Arab Spring in 2011 happened, Algeria managed to escape the Arab Spring, partly because Bouteflika promised some reforms. There was an expectation that he would not seek re-election. Obviously, he sought re-election even despite his ill health. Libya, obviously, is a long and continuing case from 2011. And even in Sudan, too, there were incidences during the Arab Spring of 2011 that could have ousted Omar Bashir in 2013. Obviously, he managed to escape that. So we're seeing the kind of reenactment of the things that did not successfully crystallize. But
Bola, many people would argue that the Arab Spring, example isn't a very good one when we're speaking about democracy and bringing in democracy. Apart from possibly the case of Tunisia, if we look at Egypt, even if we look at Libya, really, it's been just chaos ever since. And in Egypt, it's obviously gone completely the opposite way, where pretty much Mubarak's own ally is back in power. The military is back in power. He's a strong man now. He may be in power till 2030. Many people argue, Bola, on the other side, on the Western side, if I may use that term, is that this region is simply not ready for democratic change. Others find that an offensive statement, but I wonder, do you agree with that?
No, it's complete nonsense. It's this old notion that certain people are incapable of acting right. Certain people are incapable of deserving good governance or democratic rights. And I think that it is simply not only condescending, it's racist in some sense, and it is absolutely offensive, to put it mildly. I think what has happened in many of those countries is not the fact that the people are not willing to make changes and to see a transition to democratic governance. I think what we should be concerned about is the influence of powers. In most of those places that you have mentioned, from Libya to Syria, we've seen those places experience some sort of proxy wars, proxy relations, proxy politics. And that has been the main reason why those particular attempts have failed. So when people make such analysis, it needs to be put in serious context. That in Tunisia, people took to the streets and managed to ensure a democratic transition, but the people of Syria have not managed to have that same benefit, partly because of the influence of Russia in Libya. Of course, we saw the tragic influence of NATO and how that upended all the great things that the people of Libya could have done with the ousting of Gaddafi in 2011.
So I wonder then, just a final comment then, Bola, why do you think it is that Africa is having such a hard time with these specific countries and these specific leaders? There is a track record, unfortunately, isn't there? As in other parts of the world as well, of course. I don't want to pick on just Africa, but Africa does seem to have a hard time with strong men in general, doesn't it? Where we have many leaders across the continent in power for a very long time. Why is that the continuing pattern?
I think we have to go back to our colonial history. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but of course, post-colonial Africa has been a continent filled with all sorts of things. We've seen that in many parts of the continent, leaders have emerged, leaders who do not have the interests of the people at heart, and leaders who oftentimes still maintain some form of loyalty to former colonial imperial powers. But more importantly, I think there is also a sense in which institutions within Africa have not been able to address the emergence of strongmen. For a long time, OAU was seen as a club of dictators. The African Union tried to change that, obviously, tried to change that reputation. It was partly the reason why there was this notion of zero tolerance for unconstitutional change of power. But for a while, it was consistent. For over 15 years, it suspended more than 11 countries. But again, as I've mentioned earlier in the segment, that it seems that in the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years, 6 years particularly, from 2011, we've seen that it's beginning to lose that effectiveness, especially in responding particularly to breaking democratic transition. So it is a question of institutional governance at the moment, and I think that it's unfortunate that the African Union is not taking a very strong
very well,
position.
Bola. I'm gonna cut you off there. I do apologize. The clock has gotten the best of us, but of course we sincerely appreciate you taking your time out and sharing your thoughts with us on that important situation that keeps fluid there in Sudan. That was Bola Adediran, who is a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of the West of England. He was speaking to us there via Skype from Bristol. As Bola there spoke about, viewers, the situation in Sudan is a disappointing one, specifically from the point of view of the African Union. Has it lost its touch? In the past, it did used to make moral stances. This time, too, it is making seemingly at least moral stances, but it's just stances, it's just rhetoric. It's not actually acting, it's not suspending Sudan. It keeps extending the deadline for the military to bring in some sort of civilian rule from 15 days to now 60 days. What exactly will change? And then why is Egypt even involved in all this? It is the chairman of the AU, but that in and of itself is troubling, isn't it? Where that country is going in the opposite direction of any democratic future. So we'll keep a close eye on that situation in Sudan. I'll be back though with our next segment after this break. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying with us here in Scope, viewers. Well, the British Prime Minister Theresa May has essentially fired Gavin Williamson, her defense secretary. She's accused him of leaking sensitive information that came out of a national security meeting in the UK in which Huawei's 5G network was spoken about in the UK's possible use of that. Is Gavin Williamson being scapegoated? He is even sworn on his own children's life, saying he did not leak this information. What exactly is going on here at this time? Let's discuss this a bit further. We're joined now by Robin Pettitt, who is a senior lecturer in comparative politics. He's joining us now from Kingston upon Thames in the UK. And we're also joined by Justin Edward Gibbins, who's an assistant professor in international relations. He's joining us now from Dubai in the UAE. Justin and Robin, thank you both for joining us. Robin, I'd like to start with you and ask you, is Gavin Williamson being scapegoated?
No, I don't think he is. There's clearly some internal games in the Conservative Party. He has not been the most popular person in the Conservative Party. I also think a number of journalists came out in connection with this leak and said the way these leaks happen is that journalists will ask politicians questions in a way that makes the politicians think the journalist already knows stuff. So it's possible that Gavin Williams has simply thought that he was confirming something that the journalist already knew, so that he wasn't, according to himself, he wasn't leaking because he thought it was already out. So he might not have thought that he was leaking, but he was clearly not being a safe pair of hands with the information that he had.
Okay, so Justin, this is obviously very serious because any such highly classified meeting in any country around the world would be seen with the same light. Why not then ask the police to get involved?
Well, I think it's pretty much exactly as what your guest actually mentioned. It's not really about scapegoating, but it's also not really about criminality. It's about settling scores. If he had broken the Official Secrets Act, why did Theresa May or other individuals not kind of report it to the police and able to initiate a criminal investigation? I mean, she's actually mentioned that, as far as she's concerned at the moment, that the case is over, which kind of questions the kind of legal side of things. It's really about settling scores. It's exactly as your guest said. He has been a rather awkward customer, so to speak, and has embarrassed a number of figures and got himself into disagreements with like the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, and especially the issue over kind of Huawei. It's a deeply sensitive issue at the moment. So it's really about settling scores, and it's not about criminality, I don't think.
All right, so then, Robin, certainly Prime Minister May has not best of luck with her cabinet members, has she? There's been controversy surrounding a number of them. Why do you think it is that she's had such bad luck, or is this just politics as usual, do you think?
It's definitely not politics as usual. I think one of the reasons why she's had so little luck and has lost so many cabinet ministers is because the UK is going through a particularly difficult time. Since the Brexit referendum, nothing has really been politics as usual. And a fair few of her cabinet members have left because of Brexit, because of disagreements over something that it is incredibly difficult to reach any kind of agreement on. So she hasn't necessarily handled this situation particularly well, but it was also a situation that was very, very difficult to handle well. So a lot of this is down to the unprecedented things happening around Brexit. And we'll probably see more negative fallout for Theresa May as this continues not to be resolved.
Indeed, and Justin, I was listening to talk radio today from the UK, and they were talking about essentially how if Theresa May doesn't clean up her act, then oh my God, we're going to have a socialist government in power. Obviously, speaking about Jeremy Corbyn and possibly the Labour Party taking over, would Labour do a better job with this entire process? Do you think?
Well, like Labour seems, similarly fragmented. To be perfectly frank with you, I mean, you got the leader Jeremy Corbyn, who is, certainly kind of has a Brexit sentiment and certainly does not wish to have a second referendum. But of course, there are kind of many in the Labour Party that wish to kind of pretty much end Brexit through, the initiation of a second referendum. So there's, a level of kind of fragmentation there within the Labour Party, and of course the fact that fragmentation plays out with Theresa May's deal, within which, of course, she's, at some point, going to have to require kind of Labour support and so forth up until, the deadline at the end of October. So to a lesser degree, the Labour Party is fragmented over Brexit. I mean, obviously, it's principally a kind of conservative issue at the moment with, the European Research Group and May's plan, which, has been rejected and the various delays. But, you see the same kind of deliberations and the same kind of confusion, quite frankly, in the Labour Party positions as well.
And then interestingly, to throw into this, Robin, Nigel Farage and his party seem to be doing very well in the polls, at least right now, leading up into these elections, these European elections. He will not be contesting, from what I've understood right now, for the local UK elections because his party didn't register in time. But all polls say that his party will do well in the European elections. That's worrying as well, isn't it?
Well, I think the European elections are not going to be about electing members of the European Parliament. That's not what people are going to be voting on. It is going to be seen as kind of a soft referendum on the issue of Brexit. And I guess the Brexit Party is a way of putting a cross next to leave again, just like as a part of, as I said, a soft referendum. The main problem is that the Remain side of the argument is spread throughout several different parties, whereas if you want to express a desire for leave, then clearly the Brexit Party is your friend. If you want to express a desire for Remain, then there's sort of a range of options: Liberal Democrats, Change UK, the Green Party, bits of the Labour Party, but not really. So they're kind of, I think the Brexit Party are able to distill the desire for part of the population for leave, and that is why they're doing so well. They have a very clear, very simple message: we want to leave, no deal, easy. It isn't easy, of course, but it's a very simple message that they're able to display, and people react to that when there's something very complicated. If someone says, this is the answer, very simple, then people are attracted to that.
And that's confusing, isn't it, Justin? Because so many years into this process, since 2016, that referendum, and this entire Brexit chaos, why would people still support the Brexit Party, do you think?
I think, I mean, yes, it's true. Like a YouGov poll just recently published said that 30% of people polled actually support the Brexit Party, with 21% of people next in line voting for the kind of Labour position. It's a deep sense of frustration that 3 years after the democratic mandate was voted for, that Britain still finds itself in this quagmire with constant delays, negotiations, and a great deal of difficulty. And I think it's kind of transcended the traditional kind of conflict that was seen between British parliamentarians or the British establishment and kind of its European partners. And now it's really a clash over various types of sovereignties. It's a clash between popular sovereignty, what individuals voted for, at least 52% of them, and parliamentary sovereignty, which you still see within the 650 members of the British Parliament, a general kind of general majority kind of not supporting the no deal Brexit. So it's actually a clash over kind of British sovereignties, I see it, popular versus parliamentary, and until that's resolved, then it will still kind of continue to be a source of conflict.
And Robin, many people are just going through Brexit. They're just tired of hearing about Brexit, because every time you turn on television and it's always just about Brexit and the next hurdle and the next hurdle and the next hurdle. This can't just continue endlessly, can it, Robin? Where do you think this will end off? Will we end up with a no-deal Brexit, do you think?
I think this is one of the most staggeringly difficult things to predict, because there isn't a majority for anything in the UK. We have shown that repeatedly. Parliament has voted again and again against everything. So to some extent, we have, as a country, we have been asking for extension upon extension. And my best guess would be that the way that this is going to be resolved is that the EU 27, the other EU countries, finally feel ready to cope with no-deal Brexit. And then when we eventually come back and says, right, we haven't made a decision, we don't know what we want, can we have another extension? Eventually the EU 27 are going to say no, because we have other things we want to deal with. We are now ready to cope with no-deal Brexit. We don't like it, but we would rather have that than continue dealing with these uncertainty. So I would imagine that eventually the decision will be, if we can't take a decision in this country, the decision will be taken for us by the EU 27, saying, you've had as much chance as we're willing to give you. we're now ready to cope with no deal.
And that's a very good point, Robin. I'm going to interrupt you just because we're running out of time. I wanted to give Justin, if you allow me, the final word. Justin, we have a minute left. Do you think that it will be the EU at the end of the day, which will be the mature one and make the decision for the UK?
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, if there's any as fragmented as it is, and the fact that there's no majority kind of position, the general consensus, at least from the British point of view, is that no deal Brexit would be kind of economically disastrous for the country. So the positions that are against that, which are kind of the majority of positions, it's still something to kind of work with, and it will just have to be a kind of ongoing kind of negotiating practice within which the EU probably will, to a certain extent, take the lead on that issue and start kind of framing the British discourses, the British debates into moving away from that kind of hard Brexit kind of possibility, which would be not very good at all and is not supported, into some kind of better compromise than what we've seen so far.
Very well, gentlemen, we'll leave there at that. But of course, we appreciate both of your time, your insight and analysis. That was Justin Edward Gibbins, who is an assistant professor in international relations. He was speaking to us from the United Arab Emirates in Dubai. We were also joined by Mr. Robin Pettitt, who is a senior lecturer in comparative politics. He was speaking to us from the UK via Skype. And now, viewers, as both of our guests spoke about, Gavin Williamson certainly did not have a good track record while he was Defense Secretary of the UK. Made a number of mistakes and missteps in his rhetoric, speaking to the Russians in a rude fashion, amongst many such examples, of course, that we can talk about. So this possibly is not scapegoating, according to them, but Gavin Williamson obviously, again, taking the very extreme step and swearing upon the lives of his children, saying he did not leak the information about that Huawei 5G network decision, which the UK has taken. Again, that decision being taken against American wishes. And then all of this, how this all plays out, and just the Brexit chaos in general in the UK. No politician on either side seems to have the courage or the maturity to really see this process through. Theresa May is still standing strong, but of course, will she be able to deliver? Will she even still survive till 2022 to complete her 5-year term? We'll keep a close eye on all of that here in Scope, but I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.